Carter Mitchell's hands trembled as he held the specimen jar up to the fluorescent light. Inside, suspended in formaldehyde, a pale, segmented creature, nearly 2 inches long, curled against the glass like some nightmare-made flesh. His daughter Jessica stood beside him in the ICU, her white coat still wrinkled from sleeping in a chair for 3 days straight. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. 72 hours ago, she whispered, her voice raw. You thought it was just a pimple. Carter couldn't look away from the thing in the jar. The hooks, the segments, the life it had stolen from beneath his skin. 4 more hours, Jessica continued, touching the bandage on his temple where the extraction site was still healing. And the sepsis would have reached your brain. 4 hours, Dad. He finally met her eyes. How does something so small nearly kill you? She finished. That's what we're here to figure out. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks earlier, Carter Mitchell stood in his kitchen in Pflugerville, Texas, watching the morning sun burn through the live oak trees in his backyard. At 58, he'd finally learned to appreciate stillness, the kind that only comes after a lifetime of noise. The coffee maker gurgled, breaking the silence with its familiar rhythm. He was a retired software engineer from Dell, though retired felt like too gentle a word for what had happened. The company had offered him a package, and he'd taken it without argument. 27 years of code, meetings, and fluorescent lights had left him hollow. But it was Linda's death 3 years ago that had truly emptied him. Breast cancer. Stage 4 by the time they'd caught it, or rather, by the time she'd finally told him about it. Carter ran his hand along the kitchen counter, the same Formica they'd picked out together in 1998. He could still see her there, flour on her hands, laughing at some joke he'd already forgotten. The house held too many ghosts, but he couldn't bring himself to leave them. His phone buzzed. A text from Pastor Mike. Labor Day trip to Big Bend still on? You coming? Carter hesitated. The church group had been asking him to join their camping trips for 2 years now. He'd always declined, too busy, too tired, too something. But Linda's voice echoed in his memory. Carter, you can't hide forever. Live a little. He typed back, I'll be there. Across town, in the emergency department at Dell Seton Medical Center, Dr. Jessica Mitchell was wrapping up a brutal night shift. 32 years old, dark circles permanently etched under her eyes, she moved through the organized chaos with practiced efficiency. A drunk driver in Bay 3, chest pain in Bay 7. The usual Friday night carnage of a college town. Dr. Mitchell, your break room coffee's getting cold, Emily, her favorite nurse, called out. Jessica waved her off. Cold coffee's still coffee. She hadn't spoken to her father in 18 months, not since her mother's funeral, not since the words she'd screamed at him in front of everyone. You killed her with your neglect. The memory of his face, blank, stoic, silent, still haunted her during quiet moments. Her phone held his contact, his number unchanged. Her thumb had hovered over it 100 times, maybe more. But pride and grief made a thick wall, and neither of them knew how to break it down. Jessica poured the cold coffee down the sink and pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. Another patient was coming in, a skateboarding accident, the paramedics radioed. She pushed thoughts of her father away, the way she always did. Neither of them knew that in just 2 weeks, a single mosquito bite would force them back together. Neither of them knew that Carter's stubborn independence and Jessica's buried guilt would nearly cost him his life. The distance between them was measured in silence. Soon it would be measured in heartbeat. The Labor Day weekend sun beat down on Big Bend National Park with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and dance above the desert floor. Carter Mitchell stood at the edge of the Rio Grande, camera in hand, watching the Mexican mountains turn purple in the fading light. The church group had set up camp a quarter-mile back, but he'd wandered off alone, drawn by the promise of a perfect sunset photograph. His grandfather had taught him photography during the summer of 1975, back when film was precious and every shot had to count. "Patience, boy," Grandpa Jim would say, squinting through the viewfinder. "Light's like opportunity. You gotta be ready when it comes." The old man had been a Marine in the Pacific Theater, came home with medals he never wore and stories he never told. He taught Carter that real men didn't complain, didn't burden others with their troubles. You worked through the pain. You kept moving forward. Carter adjusted his lens, framing the shot. The Rio Grande looked deceptively peaceful here, nothing like the political lightning rod it had become, just water and stone and the last gasp of daylight. He clicked the shutter, then checked the image on his screen. Not quite right. He took a step closer to the water's edge. That's when they came. The mosquitoes rose from the riverside vegetation like a living cloud, their high-pitched whine filling his ears before he even saw them. Carter swatted at his neck, his arms, his face. They were relentless, diving and biting with a fury he'd never experienced. Not the lazy Texas mosquitoes he knew from his backyard. These were different. Aggressive. Hungry. "Damn it," he muttered, stumbling backward. One landed on his right temple, just below his hairline. He slapped at it, felt the wet smear of blood and insect across his palm. Too late. The itch started immediately, that familiar burning sensation that promised misery for the next few days. He retreated toward camp, swatting frantically. By the time he reached the fire circle where Pastor Mike and the others were roasting hot dogs, he'd counted at least 30 bites. His arms looked like he'd been in a fight with a thorn bush. "Good Lord, Carter!" Mrs. Chen exclaimed, adjusting her glasses to get a better look. She was 73, a widow who'd been attending First Baptist longer than Carter had been alive. "What happened to you?" "Mosquitoes down by the river," he said, still scratching. "Vicious little things." Pastor Mike handed him a bottle of bug spray. "Should have used this before you went wandering. River's the worst spot at dusk." Carter took the bottle but didn't apply it. The damage was already done. He touched his temple where the last bite throbbed. The skin felt hot, raised, probably just his imagination. Mosquito bites always felt worse than they were. That night, he lay in his tent listening to the desert sounds, coyotes in the distance, the rustle of wind through creosote bushes, the occasional crack of settling campfire wood. His temple itched. He scratched it, then forced his hand away. Scratching only made it worse. Everyone knew that. But the itch persisted, a maddening sensation that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Finally, he gave in and scratched until he felt the skin break. Warm blood on his fingertips. He wiped it on his sleeping bag and forced himself to sleep. He dreamed of Linda that night. She was standing in their kitchen, her back to him, humming something he almost recognized. When she turned around, her face was peaceful, younger than he remembered. "Carter," she said, and her voice was like water over stones. "You have to let people help you. Promise me." He woke before dawn, the dream dissolving like morning mist. The bite on his temple throbbed in time with his heartbeat. The drive home on Monday took 6 hours. Carter spent most of it replaying the dream, trying to hold on to the sound of Linda's voice. The bite on his temple had developed a small scab, which he picked at unconsciously while driving. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the scab was gone, and the skin around the bite felt tender, swollen. Tuesday morning arrived with the usual routine. Coffee at 6, shower at 6:30, a day stretching ahead with no particular purpose. Carter stood in front of the bathroom mirror, razor in hand, when he first really noticed it. The bite had developed into a small raised bump, maybe the size of a pea, red around the edges, tender to the touch. At the center, barely visible, was a tiny dark spot. "Infected mosquito bite," he muttered to himself, dabbing it with a cotton ball soaked in rubbing alcohol. The sting made his eyes water. He covered it with a small Band-Aid and went about his day. Wednesday brought a shift in the narrative his mind was telling itself. The bump had grown, not dramatically, but noticeably. Now it was the size of a marble, firm beneath his probing fingers. The skin around it felt hot, and the dark spot at the center had opened slightly, not like a pimple ready to pop, but like a small puncture wound. Carter sat at his computer and did what everyone does in the modern age. He Googled it. Infected mosquito bite black center brought up a cascade of results. Staph infections, MRSA, spider bites, something called cutaneous anthrax that made him immediately close that tab. The images were worse than the descriptions: angry red lesions, necrotic tissue, warnings about sepsis and blood poisoning. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. This was ridiculous. It was just a bug bite. His grandfather had survived a piece of shrapnel in his leg for 40 years before it finally worked its way to the surface. Grandpa Jim never complained, never saw a doctor for it until it became absolutely necessary. Carter could handle a mosquito bite. He opened a new browser window and searched for home remedies instead. Warm compresses, tea tree oil, baking soda paste. He had baking soda in the kitchen, left over from some cleaning project Linda had started and never finished. He mixed it with water until it formed a paste, then applied it to the bump. The coolness felt good, soothing. See? He could handle this himself. By Friday, the bump had grown to the size of a dime, raised a quarter-inch above his skin. The black dot at the center was now clearly a hole, maybe 2 millimeters across. Carter stared at it in the bathroom mirror, turning his head to catch the light. There was something about that hole that disturbed him, something that made his stomach clench. He pressed gently around the edges, the way he'd seen dermatologists do in YouTube videos. Pain shot through his temple, sharp and electric. He jerked his hand away, breathing hard. For just a second, maybe he'd imagined it, he'd felt something shift beneath his skin. Not the movement of fluid or tissue, but something else, something deliberate. "You're losing it, Reynolds," he said to his reflection, using his grandfather's last name like a reprimand. "It's inflammation, tissue pressure, that's all." But his hands were shaking when he covered it with a larger Band-Aid. And that night, for the first time, he considered calling a doctor. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent and accusatory. He could call the nurse hotline his insurance provided. He could make an appointment with his GP, whom he hadn't seen since Linda's funeral. He could even, and this thought made his chest tight, he could call Jessica. His daughter would know what to do. She was an ER doctor, dealt with infections and injuries every day. But the last time they'd spoken, she'd screamed at him in front of everyone, blamed him for Linda's death. How could he call her now, over something as stupid as a bug bite? She'd see it as validation of everything she'd said, that he was careless, negligent, that he didn't take care of himself. Carter set the phone down without dialing. He'd give it the weekend. If it wasn't better by Monday, then he'd do something about it. Saturday morning, he went to Kirby Lane Cafe, his regular breakfast spot for the past 20 years. Dolores, the waitress who'd served him and Linda countless stacks of pancakes, greeted him with her usual warm smile. Then her eyes caught on his temple, and the smile faltered. "Carter, honey, what happened to your face?" He touched the Band-Aid self-consciously. "Just a bug bite. Got infected." "Let me see." Before he could protest, she'd leaned over the counter, peeling back the edge of the Band-Aid. Her sharp intake of breath told him everything he needed to know. Carter Mitchell, that is not just a bug bite. That's, Lord have mercy, is that moving? The words hung in the air like smoke. Moving. He'd felt it, hadn't he? Days ago, that shift beneath his skin. But hearing someone else say it made it real in a way he couldn't deny. It's just inflammation, he said, pulling away. Fluid buildup. Dolores wasn't having it. I've seen infections, Carter. This ain't that. You need to get to a doctor today, right now. The coffee shop had gone quiet. Other patrons were staring, their curiosity mixed with concern and something that looked like revulsion. Carter felt heat rise in his face, not from fever, though his temple was burning now, but from shame. Shame at being weak, at being the center of attention, at being seen as someone who couldn't handle something as simple as a mosquito bite. He stood abruptly, throwing a 20 on the counter. "I'm fine," he said, louder than necessary. "Everyone needs to stop fussing." He walked out into the September heat, leaving behind the concerned murmurs and Dolores's worried face. In his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, he let himself really look at the bump in the rear-view mirror. The Band-Aid had come partially loose during Dolores's examination. The hole at the center was clearly visible now, dark and deep. And as he watched, unable to look away, the skin around it rippled. Not the random twitch of a muscle, not the pulse of blood flow. A ripple, like something beneath the surface adjusting its position. Carter's breath came in short gasps. His phone was in his pocket. Jessica's number was right there. 3 years of silence, 18 months of mutual stubbornness. All of it suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the thing living under his skin. He pulled out his phone, opened her contact. His thumb hovered over the call button. He could see the text message box at the bottom of the screen. He typed, "Jessie, I need help." His finger moved toward send, then stopped. He imagined her response, concern mixed with that edge of "I told you so" that had characterized their last conversation. He imagined having to explain that he'd let a bug bite fester for a week because he was too proud to see a doctor. He imagined confirming everything she believed about him. He deleted the message, turned off the phone, started the truck. There was an urgent care center in Round Rock about 20 minutes away. Not Del Seaton, not where Jessica worked. He'd go there, get it drained or whatever they needed to do, get antibiotics. He'd handle it himself, like he'd handled everything since Linda died. The decision made, Carter pulled out of the parking lot. He didn't see the woman in the SUV next to him taking a photo of his temple through her window, disturbed by what she'd witnessed. He didn't know that she'd posted on a neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Saw this poor man at Kirby Lane. Something's wrong with his face. Looked like it was moving. Should I call someone?" And he couldn't have known that among the 100 people who'd see that post, one of them would be a nurse who'd worked with Jessica Mitchell, who'd recognize the vintage UT cap Carter always wore, who'd send the photo to Jessica with a message. "Isn't this your dad?" Carter drove north toward Round Rock, one hand on the wheel, the other unconsciously touching the bump that pulsed with its own horrible rhythm. The sun beat down through the windshield. The radio played a song Linda used to love. And beneath his skin, in the darkness of tissue and blood, something ancient and patient continued to grow. The text message arrived on Jessica Mitchell's phone at 3:47 p.m. on Saturday, just as she was finishing her shift notes in the emergency department break room. It was from Monica, a nurse who'd rotated through Del Seaton 2 years ago before transferring to a clinic across town. "Isn't this your dad?" The message read, followed by a grainy photograph. Jessica's finger froze over the screen. The image showed a man in profile sitting in what looked like a parking lot. The burnt orange UT cap, faded, vintage, the exact one her mother had bought at a garage sale in 1995, was unmistakable. But it was his temple that made Jessica's medical training kick into overdrive. A raised lesion, roughly the size of a quarter, angry red with purplish edges. At the center, a dark opening, and the skin around it had a quality she'd only seen once before, during her medical mission trip to Honduras 3 years ago. Her hands were shaking as she zoomed in on the photo. The resolution was poor, but the pattern was there. The telltale signs of cutaneous myiasis, a botfly larva infection. She'd extracted 2 of them in Honduras, learned the hard way how to identify the breathing hole, the subcutaneous movement, the specific type of inflammation that surrounded these parasitic invasions. Where was this taken? She texted back immediately. Kirby Lane on 38th, this morning. Woman said the man's face was moving, literally moving. Thought you'd want to know since it might be your father. Jessica was already grabbing her keys, her bag, her white coat forgotten on the chair. She ran through the ER, nearly colliding with Dr. Hayes near the nurse's station. Jessica, what's wrong? Family emergency, she managed, not stopping. Her mind was racing through protocols, treatment options, complications. Botfly larvae in Texas. It wasn't impossible. Climate change had been pushing tropical species north for years. She'd read the papers, seen the warnings in medical journals, but her father? In Austin? Then she remembered Labor Day weekend, Pastor Mike's annual camping trip. Her father had mentioned it years ago, back when they still talked. Big Bend, right on the Mexican border, the perfect vector zone for tropical parasites carried by mosquitoes. "Oh God, Dad," she whispered, fumbling with her car keys in the parking garage. "What have you done?" She tried calling his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. That infuriating message he'd never updated, still in Linda's voice. "You've reached the Mitchells. We can't come to the phone right now." Jessica's throat tightened. She'd forgotten her mother's voice was still there, preserved in digital amber. "Dad, it's Jessica. If you get this, call me immediately. Don't go to urgent care. Come to Del Seaton. It's important. Please." Her voice cracked on the last word. She drove to his house in Pflugerville, breaking speed limits she'd normally respect. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his street, and his driveway was empty. His truck, the ancient Ford F-150 he'd been driving since before she was born, was gone. Jessica tried the front door. Locked. She knew where the spare key was hidden, under the ceramic frog her mother had painted at one of those wine and craft nights. Her hands trembled as she opened the door. "Dad?" She called into the empty house. Silence answered. The house smelled like him. Coffee, Old Spice, the faint mustiness of a place that wasn't cleaned as often as it should be. Mail piled on the kitchen counter, most of it junk. A coffee mug in the sink, dried residue at the bottom. Everything exactly as it had been the last time she'd been here, the day of her mother's funeral. She walked through the rooms, looking for clues. His bedroom was neat, the bed made with military precision, another thing his Marine grandfather had taught him. The bathroom medicine cabinet revealed what she expected. Minimal prescriptions, expired aspirin, a single bottle of antacids, no antibiotics, no wound care supplies. On the bathroom counter, she found it. A small box of Band-Aids, several missing. A dried smear of what looked like baking soda paste, and in the trash can, wadded up tissues with traces of blood and something else, a clear serous fluid that made her stomach drop. "He's been treating it himself," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the empty bathroom. "Of course he has." She pulled out her phone and called Pastor Mike. He answered on the third ring, his voice cheerful. "Jessica, this is a surprise. How are you?" "Pastor Mike, did my father go camping with you over Labor Day?" A pause. "Yes, he did. First time in years. We were so glad to have him. Why?" "Is something wrong? Did he get mosquito bites? particularly on his face or head?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, yes. He went down to the river alone at sunset on the first night. Came back covered in bites. We told him to use repellent, but you know Carter. Stubborn as they come. Jessica, what's going on?" "He's sick, Pastor. Really sick. And he won't ask for help. If you hear from him, please tell him to call me, or better yet, bring him to Del Seaton Emergency Room." "I'll pray for him," Pastor Mike said, his voice heavy with concern. "And for you both." Jessica ended the call and stood in her father's bathroom, surrounded by evidence of his pride and his pain. She thought about the last time they'd spoken, really spoken, not just the clipped exchanges at her mother's funeral. It had been her mother's birthday, 3 months before the cancer diagnosis. They'd all gone to dinner at Linda's favorite Italian place, and her father had been quiet, withdrawn. Jessica had been annoyed, thinking he was being antisocial. Now she wondered if he'd already known something was wrong with Linda. If he'd been carrying that secret, that burden alone, just like he was carrying this now. Her phone buzzed. Monica again. "Friend who took the photo says the man left Kirby Lane heading north on Lamar. That was around 11 a.m. Hope that helps. North on Lamar. Toward Round Rock. Toward the urgent care centers that lined the highway designed for people who avoided real hospitals. People like her father." Jessica made another call, this time to the charge nurse at Del Seaton. "Karen, it's Dr. Mitchell. I need you to do me a favor. Alert the other ERs in the area. Round Rock, Cedar Park, Georgetown. Tell them we might have a cutaneous myiasis case heading their way. Male, late 50s, facial lesion. If they see him, please ask them to call me immediately." "Myiasis? In Texas?" "Climate change," Jessica said grimly. "It's not just rising temperatures anymore. It's disease vectors shifting north. This is probably just the beginning." She left her father's house, locking it carefully and replacing the key under the ceramic frog. As she walked to her car, she noticed his neighbor, an elderly veteran who'd lived on the street for 30 years, standing on his porch. "Excuse me," Jessica called. "Have you seen Carter today?" The man nodded slowly. "Saw him leave around noon. Looked rough, if I'm being honest. I tried to talk to him, told him that wound on his head looked bad, real bad. He said he was going to get it checked out." "Did he say where?" "Round Rock, I think. Said something about not wanting to go to her hospital. I assume he meant you?" Jessica felt like she'd been punched. Even in crisis, even facing a potentially life-threatening infection, her father's pride, or was it shame, wouldn't let him come to her for help. "Thank you," she managed, getting into her car. She sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to think like her father. Where would he go? Which urgent care center? How long would he wait in a waiting room, downplaying his symptoms, insisting he was fine? Then another thought struck her, cold and terrible. What if he was already in trouble? Sepsis from these kinds of infections could develop rapidly. The larva itself could cause massive inflammation, and if it had been growing for over a week. She called the highway patrol. "This is Dr. Jessica Mitchell from Del Seaton Medical Center. I need to report a possible medical emergency. My father, Carter Mitchell, is driving a 2005 Ford F-150, blue license plate." She rattled off the number she'd memorized as a child. "He has a serious parasitic infection and may be experiencing altered mental status. If you have any reports of accidents or—" "Hold on, doctor," the dispatcher interrupted. "What did you say the name was?" "Carter Mitchell?" Jessica's heart stopped. "Yes? Why?" "We have a single vehicle accident reported about 15 minutes ago. Highway 45, northbound, near mile marker 183. Driver matches that description. EMS is on scene now." The world tilted. Jessica's vision tunneled. Is he alive? According to the initial report, yes, but unconscious. They're preparing to transport to Del Seaton. Jessica cut in, her voice sharp with authority and desperation. Tell them to bring him to Del Seaton, and tell them not to manipulate the facial lesion. It's a parasitic infection. If they rupture it wrong, they could spread the infection. I'm en route to the scene now. She didn't wait for confirmation. She threw her car into gear and peeled out of the driveway, heading north with her hazards on, going far too fast. Her hands gripped the wheel so hard her knuckles went white. Memories flooded her mind unbidden. Her father teaching her to ride a bike in this very neighborhood, running alongside her, his hand steady on the seat until she was ready to fly alone. Her father at her medical school graduation, tears in his eyes even though he tried to hide them, telling her how proud he was. Her father at her mother's bedside in those final days, holding Linda's hand, whispering things Jessica couldn't hear and had been too afraid to ask about. And then the funeral, the reception at their house, relatives picking over casseroles, everyone tiptoeing around grief like it was a sleeping dog. Jessica, raw and bleeding inside, watching her father stand stoically by the window, seemingly unmoved. She'd snapped, screamed at him in front of everyone, accused him of negligence, of not loving her mother enough to notice she was dying. He'd looked at her with such sadness, such defeat, and said nothing. Just turned and walked away. That was 18 months ago. "I'm sorry," she whispered now, alone in the car, flying down the highway toward her father's broken body. "Dad, I'm so sorry. Please be alive. Please let me tell you I'm sorry." Her phone rang. The dispatcher. "Dr. Mitchell, EMS is requesting guidance. The patient is semi-conscious and the facial lesion is actively seeping. They're seeing what appears to be movement under the skin. What are your instructions?" Jessica's medical training overrode her panic. "Do not touch the lesion. Cover it with a non-adherent dressing, nothing more. Start an IV, wide bore, push fluids. Get vitals and monitor for signs of septic shock, blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, and get him to Del Seaton as fast as safely possible. I'm 10 minutes out from the scene." "Understood, doctor. EMS also says the patient keeps asking for someone named Jesse. Would that be you?" Jessica's vision blurred with tears. "Yes, that's me. Tell him—" Her voice broke. "Tell him I'm coming. Tell him I'm here." She made it to the accident scene in 8 minutes. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles painted the late afternoon sky in reds and blues. Carter's truck was down an embankment, front end crumpled, airbag deployed. The ambulance was parked on the shoulder, back doors open. Jessica abandoned her car and ran down the embankment, her medical credentials held high. "I'm Dr. Mitchell. That's my father." The paramedics looked up from where they were loading the stretcher. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, nodded. "Doctor, we've got him stabilized. Vitals are concerning, BP is low, heart rate elevated, temp is 104. The facial lesion is intact, but there's significant inflammation spreading toward the periorbital region." Jessica pushed forward and saw him. Her father strapped to the stretcher, oxygen mask over his face, blood matting his white hair from where he'd hit his head in the crash. But it was the lesion that made her stomach turn. Swollen to the size of a plum now, the skin stretched thin and discolored, necrotic at the edges. The central hole was seeping a mixture of blood and serous fluid. And yes, she could see it. The movement, the subtle shifting of something alive beneath his skin. "Dad," she said, kneeling beside the stretcher. "Dad, it's Jesse." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. "Jesse, you came?" "Of course I came," she said, taking his hand. It was burning hot. "I'm here. I've got you." "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his words slurred. "About your mom. About everything. I'm so sorry." "Shh," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face now. Save your strength. We'll talk later. I promise. Just stay with me, okay? Stay with me, Dad?" His grip on her hand was weak, his skin paper dry despite the fever. "Love you, Jessie. Even if you hate me." "I don't hate you," she whispered. "I never did." "I love you. I love you so much. Now please, please just hold on." The paramedics were already moving, loading the stretcher into the ambulance. Jessica climbed in beside them, never letting go of her father's hand. As the doors closed and the siren wailed to life, she looked at the lesion one more time, at the thing that had brought them to this moment, a botfly larva, a parasite no bigger than her thumb. It had nearly killed her father. But worse than that, their pride, his and hers, had nearly killed him too. The ambulance raced toward Dell Seaton, and Jessica held her father's burning hand, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Praying for time, for forgiveness, for a second chance neither of them deserved, but both desperately needed. The ambulance bay doors exploded open as the paramedics wheeled Carter Mitchell through, Jessica running alongside the stretcher, still gripping her father's hand. The emergency department of Dell Seaton Medical Center erupted into controlled chaos, the kind of orchestrated urgency that comes from years of training and too many critical patients. "Trauma Bay 2!" Karen, the charge nurse, shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "Dr. Bennett's already scrubbed in, or is on standby." Jessica's colleagues materialized around them, nurses, techs, residents she'd trained. Their faces showed professional concern until they saw the lesion on Carter's temple. Then something else flickered across their expressions. Shock, revulsion, fear. "Jesus," someone whispered. "What is that?" "Cutaneous myiasis," Jessica said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Botfly larva. It's been growing for at least 8 to 10 days. He's septic." They transferred Carter to the hospital bed with practiced efficiency. His eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow behind the oxygen mask. The monitors began their symphony of beeps. Heart rate 142, blood pressure 88/54, oxygen saturation 91%. The numbers painted a grim picture. Dr. Sarah Bennett pushed through the crowd, her eyes immediately going to the lesion. Sarah was Dell Seaton's tropical disease specialist, a woman who'd spent 5 years with Doctors Without Borders before burning out and coming home to Texas. She'd seen things most American doctors only read about in journals. "My God," she breathed, leaning in close. "That's mature, very mature. 2 inches minimum, maybe more." She looked at Jessica, and there was something like pity in her eyes. "Jessica, you know you can't be involved in his care." "I know," Jessica said, but she didn't move, didn't let go of her father's hand. "But I can consult. I've extracted these before." Honduras, 2022. 2 successful removals, no complications. "She's right," Dr. Marcus Hayes said, appearing at Sarah's elbow. Marcus was the chief surgical resident, a calm presence in any storm. "We need her expertise. Document it as consultation, not direct care." Sarah nodded slowly. "Fine, but Jessica, you don't touch him. You advise only. Understood?" Jessica swallowed hard. "Understood." The team moved quickly, starting IV lines in both arms, pushing fluids and broad-spectrum antibiotics. Carter's fever was 104.3 degrees Fahrenheit. His white blood cell count came back critically elevated. His blood pressure kept dropping despite the fluids. Classic septic shock. "We need to get that larva out," Sarah said, studying the lesion through a magnifying lens. "But if we're not careful, we could tear the facial nerve." "Jessica, talk me through your protocol." Jessica forced herself into doctor mode, pushed down the terror and guilt, and became what her father needed most, a physician who knew how to save him. "First, we try suffocation," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Petroleum jelly, thick application over the breathing hole. We wait 5 to 10 minutes. The larva will retreat toward the opening, trying to breathe. That gives us the best angle for extraction with minimal tissue damage." "And if that doesn't work?" Marcus asked. "Surgical extraction. We'll need to incise parallel to the facial nerve trajectory, use blunt dissection to avoid nerve damage. The larva has anchoring hooks, spiracles, that embed in the muscle tissue. If we yank it out, we risk tearing the temporalis muscle, possibly damaging the facial nerve, causing permanent paralysis." Sarah was already preparing the petroleum jelly. "Let's try suffocation first. Get him to OR either way. His condition's too unstable for a procedure down here." Jessica watched as Sarah applied a thick layer of jelly over the lesion, completely covering the central breathing hole. They waited. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Carter's chest rose and fell, and Jessica counted the seconds, watching the lesion for any sign of movement. 30 seconds. Nothing. 1 minute. The skin stretched slightly, then settled. 2 minutes. Jessica's hope began to fade. 5 minutes. Sarah wiped away some of the jelly to check. The larva hadn't moved toward the surface. "It's too deep," Jessica said, her voice hollow. "It's embedded in the muscle layer. Suffocation won't work." Sarah looked at Marcus. "Now, we're going surgical." They moved as one unit, wheeling Carter toward the elevator, Jessica following despite the protests, despite the rules. Karen tried to stop her. "Dr. Mitchell, you can't go up there." "Try and stop me," Jessica said, her voice cold and final. Karen stepped aside. In the surgical suite, Jessica scrubbed in, knowing she wouldn't touch her father, but unable to stay behind glass. Sarah and Marcus worked with focused intensity, prepping the surgical field while the anesthesiologist, Dr. Patel, a woman Jessica had shared many overnight shifts with, intubated Carter and adjusted the ventilator settings. "His pressure's dropping," Dr. Patel warned. 78/42, starting vasopressors. "Work fast," Marcus told Sarah. "Clock's ticking." Sarah made the first incision, a precise cut parallel to where the facial nerve should run. Blood welled up, but it wasn't the bright red of healthy tissue. It was darker, tinged with the yellow of infection. The smell hit them immediately, the unmistakable odor of necrotic tissue. A resident turned away, hand over her mouth. "Sorry," she muttered. "Stay focused," Sarah commanded, using suction to clear the field. "I need visibility." Jessica stood frozen behind Sarah's shoulder, watching her father's face being cut open, watching the infection that had been growing silently, invisibly, for days. She'd studied parasitology in medical school, understood the life cycle of Dermatobia hominis intellectually. But seeing it in her father's flesh, knowing it had been feeding on him, growing fat on his tissue, it was different. Viscerally, horrifyingly different. "There," Marcus said, pointing with a retractor. "I can see it." They all saw it then. The larva, pale and segmented, nestled in the muscle tissue like some obscene pearl. It was massive, easily 2 inches long, maybe more. The head was embedded deep, anchoring hooks clearly visible under magnification, barbed projections that had burrowed into the temporalis muscle like fishhooks, and it was moving, slowly, deliberately, responding to the sudden exposure to light and air. "It's still alive," the resident whispered, horrified. "Of course it's alive," Sarah said. "That's the problem. Jessica, guidance. How do we grip it?" Jessica's mouth was dry. She swallowed, forced herself to think clinically. Curved forceps, grasp behind the head segments, just before the hooks. Steady traction, not jerking. If a hook breaks off, we're looking at abscess formation and more surgery. Sarah positioned the forceps carefully, her hands rock steady despite the pressure. "Ready. Marcus, Support the tissue. I don't want any tears. She closed the forceps around the larva's body. Jessica could see the creature's segments compress slightly under the pressure. Sarah began to pull, gentle but firm. The larva resisted. The hooks held fast. More traction, Marcus said, watching the monitors. His BP is 74/38. He's not going to last much longer. Sarah increased the pressure incrementally. There was a sound, soft, wet, terrible, as tissue began to separate. The larva started to give, millimeter by millimeter. "Come on," Sarah muttered. "Come on, you bastard." Jessica watched her father's vital signs deteriorating on the monitors. Heart rate climbing, blood pressure falling, oxygen saturation dropping. He was dying. Right here. Right now. Her father was dying. "Dad, please," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her, knowing it didn't matter. "Please hold on." With a final, sickening release, the larva came free. Sarah lifted it out, and for a moment, everyone in the OR stared at the thing hanging from the forceps. It was grotesque, pale, segmented, covered in barbed projections, streaked with blood and tissue, and it was still writhing, twisting in the air, looking for flesh to burrow back into. "Specimen jar," Sarah commanded, and a nurse held one out. Sarah dropped the larva inside and sealed the lid. Even through the glass they could see it moving, leaving mucus trails on the container walls. But Carter's vitals weren't improving. If anything, they were getting worse. "Pressure's still dropping," Dr. Patel called out. 70/36. He's in profound shock." "Flush the wound," Sarah ordered. "Get every bit of necrotic tissue out. The sepsis is systemic now. The larva's out, but the infection's in his bloodstream." Marcus irrigated the surgical site with liters of saline while Sarah debrided the dead tissue. Jessica watched her father's blood pressure continue its deadly descent. She'd seen this before, septic shock that progressed too far, the point where the body couldn't recover even with the source removed. "Pressure's 68/32, Dr. Patel said, his voice tight. "Maximum vasopressors. His heart can't maintain this." "Close him up," Sarah said to Marcus. "We need to get him to ICU, now." They worked with desperate speed, stapling the wound closed, applying pressure dressings. Jessica helped transfer Carter to the ICU bed, rode down with him in the elevator, her hand on his shoulder, the only comfort she could offer. The ICU was ready for them. A corner bed with full monitoring, a ventilator already set up, a nurse assigned exclusively to him. They connected him to everything: arterial line for continuous blood pressure monitoring, central line for medications, dialysis catheter because his kidneys were shutting down. Jessica stood back, useless now, as the ICU team took over. Dr. Chen, the critical care attending, gave orders in rapid succession. More fluids, different antibiotics, medications to support his failing heart. But Jessica could read the numbers, understood what they meant. Multi-organ failure. His kidneys had stopped making urine. His liver enzymes were skyrocketing. His heart was working 3 times as hard as it should and still couldn't maintain adequate pressure. His lungs were filling with fluid despite the ventilator's best efforts. Dr. Chen pulled her aside after an hour of frantic interventions. His face was kind but honest. "Jessica, you need to prepare yourself. The sepsis is overwhelming. Even if he survives the next 24 hours, the organ damage is severe. He may never be the same person he was." "What are his chances?" She had to know, even though she didn't want to. "Of survival? Less than 20%. Of meaningful recovery? Even less." Jessica nodded, numb. "Can I sit with him?" "Of course." She pulled a chair to his bedside, took his hand, so hot with fever it was like holding burning coal. The monitors beeped their ominous rhythms. The ventilator breathed for him. The dialysis machine tried to do the work his kidneys couldn't. And Jessica sat, watching her father die, knowing it was her fault as much as the parasites. If she hadn't pushed him away, if she hadn't made him feel like he couldn't call her, if she hadn't been so consumed by her own grief and anger that she'd made him choose between his pride and his life. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, laying her head on the bed rail. "I'm so sorry." Night fell over Austin. The ICU dimmed its lights, and Jessica kept her vigil, holding her father's hand, watching the numbers that told her he was slipping away. At some point, Dr. Bennett came in, still in her surgical scrubs. She sat on the other side of the bed, saying nothing, just being present. After a long silence, she spoke. "You know, in all my years treating parasitic infections, I've learned something. The parasites don't kill people. Not really. It's the delay, the denial, the pride that keeps people from seeking help until it's too late." She looked at Jessica. "Your father didn't almost die because of a botfly larva. He almost died because he couldn't ask for help." "I know," Jessica said, her voice breaking. "And I made it impossible for him to ask me." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But you found him. You saved him, Jessica. The rest is up to him now." She left, and Jessica was alone again with her father and the machines keeping him alive. She thought about the draft message on his phone, the words he'd been too afraid to send, the photos he'd kept of her, following her life from a distance because he thought she hated him. "I never hated you," she told his unconscious form. "I was angry. I was grieving, but I never hated you. And I need you to know that I need you to hear me, Dad. Please, please don't leave before I can tell you." The monitors beeped on. The ventilator hissed. And somewhere in the depths of his fevered mind, Jessica hoped her father could hear her, could hold on just a little longer, because she wasn't ready to lose him. Not like this. Not with so much unsaid between them. The ICU clock read 3:17 a.m. when the monitors began screaming. Jessica had dozed off in the chair beside her father's bed, her head resting on her folded arms, when the sound jolted her awake. The heart monitor showed a rhythm she'd seen too many times before, ventricular tachycardia, the heart beating so fast and erratically that it couldn't pump blood effectively. "Code Blue, ICU Bed 12. The announcement echoed through the unit. Within seconds, the room filled with people. Dr. Chen led the team, barking orders while a nurse positioned the crash cart. Jessica stumbled backward, out of the way, watching in horror as they began chest compressions on her father. "Starting compressions," the respiratory therapist announced, locking his hands over Carter's sternum and pushing down with rhythmic force. Jessica could hear her father's ribs creaking under the pressure, could see his whole body jerking with each compression. "Charge to 200, Dr. Chen ordered. The defibrillator whined as it powered up. "Clear!" Carter's body arched off the bed as the shock delivered. The monitor showed a flat line, then a single blip, then nothing again. "Resume compressions. Push 1 milligram of epinephrine." The nurse injected the medication into the IV line while compressions continued. Jessica pressed herself against the wall, her hands covering her mouth, unable to look away. This was her father dying. This was the end of everything. "How long?" Dr. Chen asked. 3 minutes, someone responded. 3 minutes without a viable heart rhythm. 3 minutes of his brain slowly dying from lack of oxygen. 3 minutes closer to permanent loss. "Charge to 300. Clear." Another shock. Another awful arching of his body. The monitor flickered, showed a chaotic rhythm, then flatlined again. "Resume compressions. Another milligram of epi." 4 minutes now. Jessica's vision blurred with tears. She wanted to scream at them to stop, to not let him die. but she also wanted to scream at them to let him go, to stop breaking his ribs, to give him peace. She was paralyzed between the two impulses. "Jessica," Dr. Sarah Bennett had appeared beside her, hand on her shoulder. "You should step out. I can't leave him." "Yes, you can. Let them work." 5 minutes, the timekeeper called. Dr. Chen looked at the monitor, at Carter's lifeless form, at the team performing mechanical CPR. Jessica saw the calculation in his eyes. The standard protocol was to call it at this point. 5 minutes of asystole, no response to medications or shocks. The odds of meaningful recovery were nearly zero. "Dr. Chen," Jessica heard herself say, her voice raw, "please, one more round." Dr. Chen looked at her. For a moment she saw him as a doctor assessing another doctor's judgment, weighing protocol against compassion. Then she saw him as a human being, looking at a daughter begging for her father's life. "One more round," he said. "Charge to 360. Maximum joules." The defibrillator climbed to its highest setting. The nurse positioned the paddles. "Clear!" The shock hit Carter's chest like a physical blow. His body lifted off the bed, suspended for an instant, then fell back. The monitor was silent, flat lines stretching across the screen. Then, a blip, another. A rhythm. Chaotic at first, but organizing itself. Organizing into something that could sustain life. "We have sinus tach," the nurse said, disbelief in her voice. "Heart rate 148, blood pressure 64/42. "It's there," Dr. Chen said. "Barely, but it's there." The compression stopped. Everyone stepped back, watching the monitor as if expecting it to betray them. But the rhythm held, weak, fast, struggling. But there. Jessica's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, hands over her face, sobbing. Sarah knelt beside her, arms around her shoulders. "He's back," Sarah whispered. "He came back, Jessica." But even as relief flooded through her, Jessica understood what had just happened. Her father had technically died. His heart had stopped. His brain had been without adequate oxygen for at least 5 minutes. Even if he survived now, there could be damage, memory loss, cognitive impairment, personality changes. He might wake up as someone else entirely if he woke up at all. Dr. Chen approached, crouching down to her level. "Jessica, he's stable for now. But you need to understand, this was close, very close. And we don't know yet what the impact of those 5 minutes will be. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical." Jessica nodded, unable to speak. "Get some rest," he said gently. "You're no good to him exhausted. We'll monitor him closely. If anything changes, we'll get you immediately." But Jessica couldn't rest. As the code team dispersed and the ICU settled back into its nighttime rhythm, she returned to her father's bedside. His color was terrible, gray, almost waxy. The ventilator breathed for him. The medications dripped into his veins. And somewhere inside that broken body, her father was fighting a battle she couldn't help him win. She pulled out her phone and, for the first time since the funeral, looked at old photos of her family, her mother, vibrant and laughing at some long-ago barbecue, her father, younger, his arm around Linda's waist, Jessica herself as a child, perched on her father's shoulders at the zoo. There was one photo that made her breath catch. She'd forgotten it existed. It was from her medical school graduation. Her father in the audience, partially hidden behind other people, but the camera had caught him clearly. His face was turned toward the stage where Jessica was receiving her diploma, and he was crying. Not subtle tears, full-on weeping, his hand over his mouth, his whole body shaking with pride and emotion. She'd never known he'd cried. He'd hugged her afterward, told her he was proud, but his face had been composed, controlled. But this photo captured the truth, the overwhelming love he'd hidden behind stoicism. "Why couldn't you just show me?" she whispered to his unconscious form. "Why did you have to be so strong all the time?" But she knew the answer, because that's what his grandfather had taught him. Because that's what his generation believed. That real men didn't cry, didn't complain, didn't burden others with their pain. It was the same toxic strength that had kept him from calling her about the infection, the same pride that had nearly killed him. As dawn broke over Austin, painting the ICU windows in shades of orange and pink, Jessica made a decision. If her father survived this, when he survived this, things would be different. No more silence. No more swallowing pain. No more pretending that asking for help was weakness. She would tell him everything. About her guilt over her mother's death. About the cruel words she'd said at the funeral. About how she'd followed his career from afar, too, reading every paper he'd published when he'd worked for Dell, proud of him even when she'd been too angry to say so. And she would listen. Really listen. To whatever truths he'd been carrying about her mother, about those final months when the cancer had been spreading, about why he'd chosen silence over defending himself against her accusations. They would fix this together, if he just held on. Doctor. Bennett returned around 7 a.m. with coffee and a breakfast sandwich Jessica couldn't imagine eating. "You need to eat something. Doctor's orders." Jessica took the coffee but set the sandwich aside. His numbers? Stabilizing. Slowly, but they're improving. Blood pressure is up to 76/48. Kidney function is showing marginal improvement. He made 20 milliliters of urine in the last hour. His brain? Any signs of hypoxic injury? Sarah hesitated. Too early to tell. We've scheduled an EEG and brain imaging for later today. But Jessica, you need to prepare yourself. Even if he wakes up, when he wakes up. When, Sarah conceded, he may not be the same person. "I know," Jessica said. But she didn't know, not really. She couldn't imagine her father with cognitive deficits. Couldn't picture him confused or unable to recognize her. The man who'd taught her to solve complex math problems, who'd built their deck from scratch, who could quote Hemingway and fix a carburetor, that man couldn't just disappear. The day passed in a blur of medical updates and mounting exhaustion. Jessica refused to leave, refused to go home even for a shower. She called in sick to her own shifts, the first time she'd done so in 3 years. Her colleagues understood, brought her changes of clothes, kept her updated on ER gossip to distract her. Dr. Hayes stopped by in the afternoon. "The pathology report on the larva came back," he said, holding a folder. "Confirmed Dermatobia hominis, female, mature, approximately 14 days old. It was nearly ready to drop out on its own. 2 more days and it would have left him? Maybe, or maybe the secondary infection would have killed him before then. These things are unpredictable. The larva itself rarely kills. It's the bacterial infection that develops around it. Your father's wound was heavily colonized with Staphylococcus and Streptococcus, classic cellulitis progressing to sepsis." Jessica thought about those 2 weeks of her father suffering alone, the parasite growing, the infection spreading, his body fighting a battle. It was destined to lose without intervention, all because he couldn't pick up the phone and call her. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "The hospital administration wants to do a case study. This is the first documented botfly case in Travis County. With climate change pushing these vectors north, it's important for public health awareness." "He's not a case study," Jessica snapped. "He's my father." Marcus held up his hands. "I know. I'm sorry. But if we can use this to educate other doctors, to help people recognize the signs earlier, maybe we can prevent this from happening to someone else." Jessica softened. "You're right. I'm sorry. Yes, do the case study. Use it to teach. Just not yet. Not while he's still fighting." Evening came, and with it, more improvements. Carter's blood pressure climbed to 88/58. His oxygen saturation improved. The dialysis machine, which had been running continuously, was reduced to intermittent treatment as his kidneys showed signs of recovery. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Dr. Chen came by at shift change. "I'm cautiously optimistic," he told Jessica. "He's beaten the odds so far. Now we need to see if he can wake up. When will you reduce sedation?" "Tonight. We'll lighten it gradually, see if he can breathe on his own, if there's neurological response. Jessica, you should go home, get real rest. If he wakes up, you want to be alert for it." But Jessica couldn't leave. The thought of her father waking up alone, confused and frightened, was unbearable. "I'll stay," she said, "just in case." As night fell again, the second night of this nightmare, the ICU nurse began reducing Carter's sedation medications. Jessica watched the doses decrease on the IV pump, watched for any sign of change in her father's face. At 11 p.m., his fingers twitched. At midnight, his eyelids fluttered. At 1 a.m., he grimaced, his body trying to fight the ventilator tube. "He's breathing over the vent," the nurse noted. "Good sign. His body wants to breathe on its own." At 2 a.m., Dr. Chen returned, assessing Carter's respiratory effort. "Let's try extubation," he decided. "If he fails, we can always re-intubate. But I think he's ready." They prepared quickly, Jessica standing at the head of the bed, her hand on her father's shoulder. Dr. Chen deflated the cuff on the endotracheal tube and slid it out smoothly. Carter coughed, gagged, his body rejecting the foreign object that had been breathing for him. "Easy, Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Chen said, placing an oxygen mask over his face. "You're okay. Just breathe." Carter's eyes opened, unfocused, confused, but open. They darted around the room, trying to make sense of lights and machines and unfamiliar faces. Then they found Jessica. "Jessie?" The word came out as a croak, his voice raw from the breathing tube. Jessica's knees nearly buckled. She leaned close, her face near his. "Dad." "Yes, it's me. I'm here." "Where?" He tried to lift his head, couldn't. "What happened?" "You were sick. You had a bad infection, but you're okay now. You're going to be okay." His hand moved weakly, searching for hers. She grabbed it, held it tight. "Jessie, I'm sorry. About everything, about your mother. I should have—" "Dad, no. Don't try to talk, just rest." But he persisted, his eyes filling with tears. "I need to tell you about Linda. She knew. She found the lump 8 months before." "I know, Dad. I know everything. I found the message on your phone. The draft you didn't send. I know." Jessica was crying now, too, all the professional composure she'd maintained for 2 days crumbling. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said at the funeral. You didn't kill Mom. You loved her. You were protecting me. I understand now. You don't hate me?" "I never hated you. Never. I was angry and hurting, and I blamed you because I couldn't blame her. But I never stopped loving you, Dad." Not for 1 second. Carter's grip on her hand tightened slightly, all the strength he had. "I wanted to call you when I got sick, but I thought—" "I know. I made you feel like you couldn't. That's on me. But we're going to fix this, okay? Both of us. No more silence. No more pride. We talk to each other. We ask for help. We don't let anything come between us again. Promise?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I promise, Dad. I promise." He nodded, his eyes already closing again, exhaustion overtaking him. But this time it was different. This wasn't the unconsciousness of a dying man. This was sleep. Healing. Restorative sleep. Dr. Chen checked the monitors, adjusted some settings, and turned to Jessica with a smile. "He's through the worst of it. Neurologically intact, responsive, oriented. He's going to make it, Jessica. Your father's going to be fine. Jessica collapsed into the chair, relief so intense it was almost painful washing over her. She'd been holding herself together for 2 days through sheer force of will, and now that will crumbled. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed, great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. Sarah appeared, as she always did when Jessica needed her, and wrapped her arms around her colleague, her friend. "He's okay," she whispered. "You both are. You saved him, Jessica. You saved each other." 3 days after Carter opened his eyes, Jessica stood in the hospital corridor outside his ICU room, listening to Dr. Chen deliver news that shattered her fragile hope like glass. "The kidney function hasn't improved as much as we'd hoped," Dr. Chen said, his voice measured and careful. "His creatinine is still climbing. We're at 4.2 now, up from 3.8 yesterday. The acute tubular necrosis from the septic shock was more extensive than we initially thought." Jessica's medical mind understood the implications immediately, even as her daughter's heart refused to accept them. "What are you saying?" "He's going to need dialysis. Long-term, possibly permanent. We can't say for certain yet, but the damage to the nephrons appears irreversible." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on saving her father's life that she hadn't fully considered what quality of life he'd have afterward. Dialysis meant treatments 3 times a week, 4 hours at a time. It meant dietary restrictions, fluid limitations, a complete restructuring of daily existence. It meant dependence on a machine to do what his kidneys could no longer do. "How do I tell him?" Jessica asked, her voice hollow. "I'll be there with you. But Jessica, there's something else." Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet, showing her the latest brain scans. The MRI shows multiple small ischemic lesions, mini-strokes from the hypoxic event during the code. They're small, scattered through the frontal and temporal lobes. Jessica stared at the scan, at the small bright spots that indicated areas where her father's brain had died during those 5 minutes without oxygen. Cognitive effects? Too early to determine the full extent. He's lucid now, knows who he is, where he is, but we're seeing some short-term memory issues. He asks the same questions repeatedly, and his emotional regulation seems affected. He's more tearful, more easily agitated than his baseline. Jessica nodded mechanically, adding this to the growing list of ways the infection had destroyed her father. The parasite was gone, but it had left a wake of destruction in its path. "There's more," Dr. Chen continued, and Jessica braced herself. "The wound on his temple, it's not healing properly. There's necrotic tissue we couldn't fully debride during surgery. Dr. Bennett thinks he may need reconstructive surgery once he's stronger. There's significant tissue loss, possible nerve damage. He'll have permanent scarring, possibly some facial weakness." "Facial paralysis?" "Partial, likely. The facial nerve was compromised by both the larva's hooks and the infection. It's a miracle it wasn't completely severed." Jessica leaned against the wall, the accumulated weight of everything crushing her. Her father had survived, yes, but what had survived? A man who would need dialysis to live, whose brain had been damaged, whose face might never work properly again. A man who prided himself on independence, now facing a future of complete dependence. "I need to tell him," she said finally. "He deserves to know." When Jessica entered Carter's room, he was awake, staring at the ceiling. The oxygen mask had been replaced with a nasal cannula, but he still looked diminished, a shadow of the strong, stubborn man who'd raised her. "Hey, Dad," she said, pulling a chair close to his bed. He turned his head toward her, and she saw the confusion flicker across his face before recognition settled in. "Jessie, when did you get here?" "I've been here the whole time, Dad. We talked an hour ago, remember?" He frowned, searching his memory. "Did we? I don't... Everything's fuzzy? Jessica took his hand. That's normal. You've been very sick. Your brain needs time to heal. My head hurts, he said, his voice taking on a plaintive quality she'd never heard from him before. And I'm tired. So tired, Jessie. I know. Dr. Chen needs to talk to us about your recovery. Are you up for that? Carter nodded, but Jessica saw fear in his eyes. The same fear she'd seen when he'd woken up intubated, disoriented and helpless. The fear of a man who'd always been in control facing a reality where control was impossible. Dr. Chen entered, his bedside manner gentle but honest. He explained the kidney damage, the need for dialysis, the brain lesions, the facial nerve injury. With each revelation, Jessica watched her father's face, watched hope drain away, watched despair settle in its place. So I'm broken, Carter said when Dr. Chen finished. Not a question, a statement. You're healing, Dr. Chen corrected. But yes, there's permanent damage. The sepsis, the cardiac arrest. Your body went through tremendous trauma. Some things we can rehabilitate, some we can manage, some we'll have to accept. Dialysis for the rest of my life? Possibly. We're hoping for some kidney recovery, but we need to be realistic about expectations. Carter was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so small Jessica barely recognized it, I don't want this. I don't want to live like this. Dad, Jessica started, but he cut her off. I'm serious, Jessie. I'm 58 years old. I can't remember what you told me an hour ago. I'll need a machine to clean my blood 3 times a week. My face... He touched the bandage on his temple. I'm going to look like a monster, be a burden. I should have just died in that crash. Don't say that, Jessica said, her voice breaking. Don't you dare say that. Why not? It's true. You saved my life, but for what? So I can be half a person? So you can feel obligated to take care of me because you feel guilty? The words were knives, each one cutting deeper. Is that what you think? That I saved you out of guilt? Didn't you? Carter's eyes were red-rimmed, tears streaming down his face. The emotional dysregulation Dr. Chen had warned about, but also genuine anguish. You said it yourself at your mother's funeral. I let her die, and now you had to save me because you couldn't save her. Jessica stood abruptly, her own emotions boiling over. You want to know why I saved you? Fine. I'll tell you. I saved you because I love you. Because I was wrong about Mom. Because I've spent 18 months hating myself for the things I said to you. Because the thought of losing you before I could tell you I'm sorry was unbearable. Jessie. No, let me finish. You're right that you're not the same person you were 2 weeks ago. Your kidneys are damaged, your brain is damaged. You'll have scars, but you're still my father. You're still the man who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up all night helping me study for medical boards, who loved Mom so much he let me hate him to protect her memory. That person is still in there, and I'm not giving up on him just because things are hard now. Carter looked away, his jaw working. I don't know how to be weak, Jessie. I don't know how to need help. Then learn. Learn with me. Because I don't know how to forgive myself, and I don't know how to fix what's broken between us. But we'll figure it out together. For a long moment, neither spoke. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, Austin sprawled under a cloudless sky. Finally, Carter's hand found hers again. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Me too, Jessica said. But we're going to get through this, one day at a time. Dr. Chen, who'd been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. I know this is overwhelming, but Mr. Mitchell, you're alive. 6 days ago, your survival odds were less than 20%. Now you're talking, breathing on your own. understanding everything we're telling you. That's remarkable. The road ahead will be difficult, but you don't have to walk it alone. What happens now? Carter asked. We continue monitoring, start physical therapy as soon as you're strong enough. We'll begin dialysis training so you understand the process. We'll work with neurology on cognitive rehabilitation. And we'll schedule the wound revision surgery for your temple, probably in about 3 weeks, once the infection is completely clear. Carter absorbed this, his expression bleak. And after all that, you go home. You adapt. You live. Dr. Chen paused. Mr. Mitchell, I've been doing this for 23 years. I've seen people survive things that should have killed them, and I've seen them find meaning in that survival. Your life will be different now, but it's still yours. What you do with it, that's up to you. After Dr. Chen left, Jessica stayed with her father. They didn't talk much. Carter seemed exhausted by the conversation, by the weight of his new reality. But he didn't let go of her hand, and she took that as something. That evening, while Carter slept fitfully, Jessica stepped out to the hospital chapel. She hadn't been in one since her mother's funeral, hadn't prayed in even longer. But now she sat in the quiet space, surrounded by non-denominational symbols of faith, and tried to find words for what she was feeling. She wasn't sure who she was praying to, God, the universe, her mother's memory. But she prayed anyway, for strength, for wisdom, for the ability to help her father find purpose in this diminished life. And she prayed for forgiveness, though she still wasn't sure whether she was asking for it or trying to grant it to herself. Linda, she whispered to the empty chapel, if you're out there, if you can hear me, I'm trying. I'm trying to take care of him. I'm trying to be what he needs, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. No answer came, of course, just the silence of the chapel and the distant sounds of the hospital beyond. Jessica sat there until her legs went numb, until visiting hours were over and the chapel lights dimmed automatically. When she returned to Carter's room, he was awake again, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Can't sleep? Jessica asked. Keep having dreams, he said. About the larva. I can still feel it sometimes, moving under my skin, even though I know it's gone. Phantom sensations, common with traumatic injuries. It's not just that. Carter's voice was strained. In the dreams, I can feel it growing, feeding, and I can't do anything to stop it. I just have to lie there and let it consume me. Jessica sat on the edge of his bed. Dad, it's gone. Dr. Bennett removed it completely. You saw it in the jar. I know. But Jessie, what if there are more? What if there were eggs? What if... There weren't. We checked. Extensively. It was a single larva, and it's dead now. You're safe. But she understood what he was really asking. It wasn't about the parasite anymore. It was about control, about the violation of having something live inside him without his knowledge or consent. It was about the ultimate betrayal of his own body, which he'd always treated as something that would obey his will if he just pushed hard enough. The things we can't control, she said slowly, are the scariest. I get that. But Dad, you can't control everything. None of us can. We can only control how we respond. And how am I supposed to respond to this? The anger was back in his voice, the bitterness. With gratitude, should I be thankful I'm alive when being alive means being dependent and broken? No, Jessica said. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to grieve what you've lost. But eventually you have to decide whether you're going to let this destroy you or change you. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who what? Who watched her mother die? Who said unforgivable things to her father? Who almost lost him too? Don't tell me I don't understand loss, Dad. Don't tell me I don't understand grief. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both on the edge of saying things that couldn't be unsaid. Then Carter's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're right. You've lost everything too. And here I am, feeling sorry for myself when you're the one who's been holding everything together." Jessica softened. "We're both a mess. But at least we're a mess together now. Your mother would be disappointed in me, in how I've handled all this." "No," Jessica said firmly. "Mom would tell you that asking for help isn't weakness, that surviving doesn't make you less of a man, that it's okay to not be okay. She always did see things more clearly than me. She loved you, Dad, through everything, and she'd want you to fight, not just to survive, but to live, really live." Carter was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "I don't know how to do that anymore. How to live, I mean, everything I was. The independence, the strength, the pride. It's all gone. What's left?" Jessica thought about this carefully. "What's left is everything that actually mattered. You're still kind. You're still stubborn as hell, which honestly we're going to need. You're still the person who taught me that fixing things takes patience. You're still my father. The rest we'll figure out. What if I can't? What if I can't adapt, can't accept this new version of myself? Then I'll be here to remind you who you are. Every single day if I have to." Carter looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since waking up she saw something other than despair in his eyes. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. The acknowledgement that this wasn't the end, just a different kind of beginning. "I don't deserve you," he said. "You're right. You deserve better. But you're stuck with me anyway." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. It was crooked, the left side of his mouth not quite responding properly, evidence of the facial nerve damage, but it was a smile nonetheless. "Your mother used to say the same thing," he said, "that I was stuck with her. She was a smart woman. The smartest. She'd know what to do right now. She always knew." Jessica squeezed his hand. "Maybe that's her gift to us, that we have to figure it out ourselves, that we have to choose to fight, choose to heal, choose each other. Maybe that's how we honor her memory." Carter nodded slowly, exhaustion pulling at him again. "Will you stay? Just for tonight?" "I'll stay as long as you need me." As her father drifted back to sleep, Jessica sat in the darkened room and thought about the long road ahead. The dialysis treatments, the physical therapy, the cognitive rehabilitation, the surgery to repair his face, the emotional work of rebuilding what had been broken between them. It was overwhelming, insurmountable, impossible. But they'd survived the impossible already. They'd survived the parasite, the sepsis, the cardiac arrest. They'd survived 18 months of silence and grief. They'd survived the worst moments of their lives. Maybe they could survive this too. Maybe survival was enough for now, and meaning would come later. Outside the ICU window, the Austin skyline glittered with lights. Somewhere in the hospital, other families were fighting their own battles, experiencing their own tragedies, and somewhere, Jessica hoped, they were also finding moments of grace, of connection, of unexpected strength. She looked at her father's sleeping face, at the bandage covering the wound where something had lived and fed and nearly killed him, at the scars that would never fully fade, at the man who'd lost so much but was still here, still breathing, still trying. "We'll figure it out, Dad," she whispered. "Together, one day at a time." And in the quiet of the ICU, surrounded by machines and monitors and the steady rhythm of life persisting against all odds, Jessica Mitchell allowed herself to believe it might actually be true. 2 weeks after Carter's cardiac arrest, Jessica sat in Dr. Bennett's office, staring at a pathology report that changed everything she thought she understood about her father's infection. "I don't understand," Jessica said, reading the document for the third time. The toxicology screen shows elevated levels of immunosuppressants, specifically corticosteroids. But Dad wasn't on any steroids. Sarah Bennett leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. "That's what we thought too. But when we ran a more detailed medication history cross-referencing with his pharmacy records, we found something. Your father had been taking prednisone for the past 6 months. For what? He never mentioned. Rheumatoid arthritis. Early onset, diagnosed last March. He'd been managing it himself, getting prescriptions from a walk-in clinic, paying cash so it wouldn't go through insurance." The words landed like stones. "He was hiding it." "It appears so." "And Jessica, the prednisone, it's likely why the botfly infection became so severe so quickly. Steroids suppress the immune system. What should have been a contained parasitic infection became systemic because his body couldn't mount an adequate immune response." Jessica felt the room tilt. "You're telling me that Dad had a condition he was hiding, took medication that made him vulnerable, and that's why he nearly died?" "I'm telling you that your father has been in chronic pain for months and didn't tell anyone. The arthritis was affecting his hands, his ability to do woodworking, which was his primary coping mechanism after your mother died. He was taking steroids to manage the pain, but they left him immunocompromised. When the botfly larva burrowed in, his body simply couldn't fight it effectively." Jessica stood abruptly, pacing the small office. "Why wouldn't he tell me? I'm a doctor. I could have helped him." "I could have. Could you?" Sarah's question was gentle but pointed. "Jessica, you and your father hadn't spoken in 18 months. He was in pain, alone, grieving, and he had no one to tell. Or rather, he thought he had no one." The guilt that Jessica had been managing, compartmentalizing, came crashing down with full force. Her father had been suffering, physically and emotionally, and she'd been so consumed by her own anger and grief that she'd abandoned him to face it alone. "There's more," Sarah continued, pulling out another document. "The walk-in clinic he'd been using? They're under investigation for prescribing controlled substances without proper oversight. Your father's prednisone dosage was way too high for his condition. Essentially, he was being overtreated, which made the immunosuppression even worse." "Jesus Christ. We've reported it to the medical board. But Jessica, your father is a victim here. Of his own pride, yes, but also of a system that failed him. He needed help, couldn't bring himself to ask his daughter, and ended up in the hands of a clinic that didn't provide adequate care." Jessica sank back into the chair, her mind reeling. She thought about all the conversations she and her father hadn't had, about the 18 months of silence, about how he must have reached for the phone 100 times, wanting to call her, wanting to tell her about the pain in his hands, the diagnosis that was stealing his last remaining joy. But he hadn't called, because she'd made him believe she hated him. "I need to tell him I know," Jessica said. "Are you sure? He's been through so much already. Finding out that his medical choices contributed to this might... He deserves the truth. All of it. No more secrets. That's what got us here in the first place." When Jessica entered her father's ICU room, he'd been moved to a regular room 2 days ago, but Jessica still thought of it as the ICU. She found him awake, staring at his hands. His fingers were swollen at the joints, the telltale signs of rheumatoid arthritis obvious now that she knew what to look for. "Dad, we need to talk." Carter looked up, and Jessica saw shame flash across his face. He knew. Somehow he knew what she was about to say. "They told you," he said, not a question. "About the arthritis?" "Yes." "About the prednisone?" Yes. About how the steroids compromised your immune system and made the infection nearly fatal. Yes, they told me everything. Carter's shoulders sagged. I was going to tell you. Eventually. When? After you died from an infection your body couldn't fight? After the arthritis crippled your hands completely? When, Dad? I don't know. The outburst surprised them both. Carter's hands clenched despite the pain it must have caused. I don't know when I was going to tell you. Maybe never. Maybe I was just going to disappear slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to tell. Jessica pulled a chair close to his bed, forcing herself to stay calm. Why didn't you come to me when you got the diagnosis? Because you weren't speaking to me. Because the last thing you said to me was that I killed your mother. Because I didn't want to be another burden, another dying parent you had to watch suffer. So you chose to suffer alone, to risk your life rather than ask for help? Yes, Carter's voice cracked. Yes, that's exactly what I did. Because that's what I do, Jessie. That's what I've always done. I take care of things myself. I don't complain. I don't ask for help. That's how I was raised. That's who I am. That's who you were, Jessica corrected. But Dad, that person nearly died. That person's pride and silence almost cost him everything. Is that really who you want to be? Carter looked at his damaged hands, at the IV line still taped to his arms, at the dialysis catheter in his chest. I don't know who I want to be anymore. I don't even know who I am. Jessica took his hand gently, careful of the swollen joints. You're my father. You're a man in pain who needs help. You're someone who made mistakes because he didn't know how to ask for what he needed. And you're someone who gets a second chance to do things differently. What if I can't? What if I'm too old, too set in my ways? Then you fail, and you try again. And eventually, maybe, you learn that needing people isn't weakness. It's just being human. Tears rolled down Carter's face, and this time he didn't try to hide them. I'm scared, Jessie. The arthritis, it's going to get worse. My hands are already useless half the time. I can't do woodworking anymore. I can't even open a jar. And now with the kidney damage, the brain injury, I'm falling apart piece by piece. I know. But you're not falling apart alone, not anymore. You shouldn't have to do this. You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't have to take care of your broken father. Jessica's grip on his hand tightened. You took care of me for 32 years. You were there for every scraped knee, every bad grade, every heartbreak. You put me through college and medical school. You sat in the audience at my graduation and cried. Yes, I saw the photo. I know you cried because you were proud of me. Did you ever once think I was a burden? Of course not. You were my daughter. It was different. Why? Why is it different? Why are you allowed to take care of me, but I'm not allowed to take care of you? Carter had no answer for that. He looked away, jaw working, struggling with emotions he'd suppressed his entire life. Jessica continued, her voice softer now. The steroids you were taking, they were from a clinic that's under investigation. You were being overtreated, Dad. The doses they gave you were way too high. That's why your immune system couldn't fight the infection. That's why you nearly died. Carter's face went pale. I did this to myself? No. A negligent clinic did this to you. But Dad, if you'd come to me, if you'd let me help you manage the arthritis properly, then I'd still have rheumatoid arthritis. I'd still be in pain. I'd still be losing the one thing that kept me sane after your mother died. Maybe, but you'd be alive, and we'd be facing it together. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside the window, a helicopter landed on the hospital roof, bringing another emergency case, life and death, playing out in endless cycles. There's something else, Carter said finally. Something I need to tell you. About your mother. Jessica braced herself. Okay. You know she knew about the cancer 8 months before she told you. What you don't know is why she waited. Carter's voice was thick with emotion. She found the lump in January. By March, she knew it was bad. She'd done her own research, recognized the signs. But Jessie, you'd just started your residency. You were so happy, so excited. And your mother, she couldn't bear to take that from you. Dad, let me finish. She made me promise not to tell you. Made me swear. She said, Carter, our daughter has worked her whole life for this. I'm not going to be the reason she gives it up. So we waited. We watched the cancer spread, and we waited, because she loved you more than she loved her own life. Jessica's vision blurred with tears. She should have told me. I would have understood. Would you? Or would you have quit your residency, come home, put your life on hold? Be honest. Jessica thought about it, really thought about it, and she knew the truth. I would have quit. I would have spent every moment with her. Exactly. And she didn't want that. She wanted you to have your dream even if it cost her time. Even if it cost her life. Carter's voice broke. So I kept her secret. And when she finally told you, when it was stage 4 and untreatable, I let you hate me for not catching it sooner. Because that was easier than you hating yourself for not being there. The truth hit Jessica like a physical blow. Her mother's sacrifice, her father's sacrifice, both of them choosing to bear pain rather than burden her with it. Both of them loving her so much, they'd shouldered impossible weights alone. You should have told me, Jessica whispered. At the funeral, when I accused you. You should have told me the truth. I promised your mother I wouldn't. She died asking me to protect you from the guilt. How could I break that promise? So you let me break you instead? Carter shrugged, a gesture that spoke of resignation and love intertwined. You're my daughter. I'd do anything for you, even that. Jessica stood abruptly and walked to the window, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Behind her, she heard her father's labored breathing, the beep of monitors, the sounds of a man trying to heal from wounds, both visible and invisible. I'm so sorry, she said, not turning around. I'm sorry I made you carry that alone. I'm sorry I said those terrible things. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you got the arthritis diagnosis, when the pain started, when you needed me most. Jessie. No, let me finish. You and Mom, you both made choices out of love. Misguided choices, maybe. Painful choices. But love, nonetheless. And I repaid that love with silence and anger and abandonment. So I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. She felt her father's presence behind her before she heard him. He'd gotten out of bed, pulled his IV pole with him, crossed the room despite the pain in his joints and the weakness in his legs. His hand touched her shoulder, and she turned to find him there, tears streaming down his face. No more apologies, he said. No more guilt. Your mother made her choice. I made mine. And you saved my life, Jessie. You found me when I was dying. You fought for me when I'd given up. You're here now, and that's all that matters. Jessica fell into his arms, and they held each other, two broken people trying to piece each other back together. The IV lines tangled between them. The dialysis catheter pressed awkwardly against her shoulder. His weakened legs trembled with the effort of standing. But they held on. We're going to do things differently from now on, Jessica said against his shoulder. No more secrets, no more bearing pain alone. When you hurt, you tell me. When I hurt, I tell you. Deal? Deal, Carter said. But Jessie, the arthritis is going to get worse. And with the kidney damage, the cognitive issues, I'm going to need a lot of help. I know. I'm going to be dependent on you for basic things. Cooking, cleaning, maybe eventually bathing, dressing. I know, Dad, and I'm ready for it. All of it. Carter pulled back to look at her. You shouldn't have to give up your life for me. I'm not giving up my life. I'm choosing what matters, and you matter. We matter. This, she gestured between them, this relationship, this family, even though it's just the two of us now, this matters more than anything else. Your mother would be proud of you, Carter said, his voice soft. She'd be proud of both of us. Yeah, she would. Jessica smiled through her tears. Even though we took the scenic route to get here. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other up literally and figuratively. Then Jessica helped her father back to bed, careful of all the lines and tubes of his damaged body and fragile strength. As she was adjusting his blankets, Carter caught her hand. Jessie, I need to know, do you forgive me? For the silence about your mother? For the arthritis? For being too proud to ask for help? Do you forgive me? Jessica looked at her father, at his scarred face, his damaged body, his eyes that held so much love and so much pain. And she realized something fundamental. Forgiveness wasn't something you gave once and were done with. It was something you practiced day after day in small moments and large ones. I'm working on it, she said honestly. Every day I'm working on it. And Dad, I need you to forgive me too. For the things I said, for the silence, for not being there when you needed me. Already done, Carter said. The moment you found me, the moment you fought for my life, everything was forgiven. It can't be that easy. Why not? You're my daughter. I love you. It really is that simple. Jessica sat on the edge of his bed, still holding his hand. Then we start from here. From this moment. No more looking back. No more dwelling on what we did wrong. We just move forward. Together. Together. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Austin, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the hallway, nurses changed shifts. Doctors made rounds. Life continued its relentless march forward. And in room 412, a father and daughter sat together, holding hands, beginning the long process of healing not just bodies, but hearts. The truth had been revealed. The secrets had been spoken. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, still filled with challenges and pain and difficult days, they would face it together. Finally, after 18 months of silence, after years of unspoken pain, after a parasite nearly destroyed everything, they had found their way back to each other. And that, Jessica thought, was worth every painful step of the journey. 6 weeks after the extraction surgery, on a crisp November morning in Austin, Carter Mitchell sat in his daughter's kitchen, watching her make pancakes the way his late wife used to, with extra vanilla and a pinch of cinnamon. The scar on his temple had healed into a thin, silver line, barely visible unless you knew where to look. His face had regained some movement, though his smile still tilted slightly to the left, a permanent reminder of the facial nerve damage. "You're doing it wrong," Carter said, his voice carrying a teasing tone that Jessica hadn't heard in years. "Mom always added the cinnamon to the batter, not sprinkled it on top." Jessica turned, spatula in hand, and raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now you're a pancake expert? The man who lived on frozen dinners for 3 years? I was married to the pancake queen for 35 years. That makes me an expert by osmosis." Jessica laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen with warmth. It was a Tuesday morning, one of Carter's dialysis days, and they'd fallen into a routine over the past weeks. Breakfast together before his treatment, then Jessica would work a half shift at the hospital while Carter was at the dialysis center, and they'd have dinner together in the evening. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was theirs. Carter had moved into Jessica's guest room 4 weeks ago, after his discharge from the rehabilitation facility. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been difficult days when his cognitive issues made him forget where he was, when the frustration of his physical limitations made him lash out, when the reality of his dependence crushed his spirit. But there had also been good days, days like this one, where the old Carter emerged, humor intact despite everything. "So I got a call yesterday," Jessica said, plating the pancakes, "from Dr. Bennett. The CDC wants to interview you for their Climate Change and Emerging Diseases Initiative." Carter's smile faded slightly. "They want to use me as a cautionary tale. They want to use your case to educate people. Dad, what happened to you? It's going to happen to more people. Botfly cases in Texas have tripled this year. The climate is changing, disease vectors are shifting north, and most doctors in this country wouldn't recognize a botfly larva if it was staring them in the face. Until 6 weeks ago, you wouldn't have either if you hadn't been to Honduras." "Exactly. Which is why your story matters. You could help save lives, Dad." Carter pushed his pancakes around his plate. His hands still hurt in the mornings, the arthritis worse with the cold weather. Jessica had found him a new rheumatologist, one who'd properly managed his condition without the dangerous overuse of steroids. But the damage was done. His fingers would never have their old dexterity. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it," Carter admitted. "Every time I think about that thing inside me, feeding on me," he shuddered. "I still have nightmares, Jessie. Still wake up feeling like something's crawling under my skin." Jessica reached across the table and took his hand. "I know. PTSD from medical trauma is real, and we're going to get you help for it. But Dad, think about it this way. Someone else out there might ignore a weird bump, might think it's just a pimple, might wait too long because they're too proud to ask for help. Your story could reach that person, could save them." Carter was quiet for a long moment, staring at his scarred hands. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'll do the interview. But only if you're there with me." "Of course. We're a team now, remember?" After breakfast, they drove to the dialysis center in Jessica's car. Carter's truck had been totaled in the crash, and he'd decided not to replace it. His neurologist had recommended he not drive for at least 6 months, maybe longer, given the cognitive issues that still lingered. It was another loss of independence, another reminder of how much had changed. The dialysis center was busy, as always. Carter had been coming 3 times a week for a month now, and he'd gotten to know the other patients, mostly older folks, some diabetics, some with genetic kidney diseases. There was a camaraderie among them, a shared understanding of what it meant to be tethered to a machine to survive. "Morning, Carter," called out Mrs. Rodriguez from her chair. She was 73, had been on dialysis for 8 years. "Where's that pretty daughter of yours?" "She's got to get to work," Carter said, settling into his assigned chair. "But she'll pick me up after." "You're lucky having family," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "My kids, they're too busy. I take a cab here, cab home." That's life. Carter thought about that as the nurse accessed his dialysis catheter and connected him to the machine. He was lucky. Despite everything, the infection, the organ damage, the cognitive issues, the chronic pain, he was lucky because he wasn't alone. Jessica had taken him in, rearranged her life, made room for his brokenness, not out of obligation or guilt, but out of love. The 4 hours of dialysis passed slowly. Carter tried to read, but his concentration still wavered. He tried to watch TV, but the noise bothered him. Mostly, he just sat and thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. A botfly larva. Something so small, so random, had nearly destroyed him. But in destroying him, it had also rebuilt something more important. His relationship with his daughter, his ability to be vulnerable, his understanding that strength wasn't about never needing help, but about having the courage to ask for it. When Jessica picked him up that afternoon, she had news. Pastor Mike called. The church wants to do a welcome home service for you this Sunday. The whole congregation wants to celebrate your recovery. Carter's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of being the center of attention, of having people fuss over him, made him uncomfortable. But then he remembered his promise, no more hiding, no more bearing things alone. "Okay," he said, "but I want to say something, to thank everyone who prayed for me, who checked on you while I was sick. They should know it mattered." Sunday arrived too quickly. Carter stood in the church fellowship hall surrounded by people he'd known for decades and felt overwhelmed by their love and concern. Mrs. Chen had made her famous dumplings. Pastor Mike had organized a potluck. Even some of Jessica's colleagues from the hospital had come, including Dr. Bennett and Dr. Hayes. When it was time for Carter to speak, Jessica helped him to the front of the room. His legs were still weak, his balance not what it was, but he stood there, looking at the faces of his community, and found his voice. "I'm not good at this," he began, his words slightly slurred from the residual brain damage. "I'm not good at accepting help, not good at being vulnerable. My whole life I was taught that real men don't complain, don't ask for anything, just tough it out, and that thinking almost killed me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The cognitive issues made it hard sometimes to find the right words, but he pushed through. "6 weeks ago, I had a parasite living in my face. Sounds like something from a horror movie, right? But the real horror wasn't the parasite, it was my pride. I knew something was wrong. I felt it growing, felt it moving. But I didn't call my daughter, didn't go to a doctor because I thought asking for help made me weak." Carter's hand went to his temple, touching the scar. "This mark, right here, it's a reminder. Not of the parasite, but of what pride costs. I almost died because I couldn't pick up a phone, because I'd rather suffer alone than burden someone I loved." He looked at Jessica, standing in the front row, tears already streaming down her face. "My daughter saved my life, not just medically, though she did that too. She saved me from myself, from the silence and stubbornness that was killing me slowly, and I want everyone here to learn from my mistake." Carter's voice grew stronger, more urgent. "If something's wrong, physically, mentally, emotionally, tell someone. Ask for help. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's survival. Don't let pride or shame or fear keep you from reaching out, because I promise you, the people who love you want to help. They're just waiting for you to let them." The room was silent. Then Pastor Mike started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. But Carter wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said, raising his hand for quiet. "Climate change. I know some of you don't want to hear about it, think it's political or whatever. But it's real, and it's bringing new diseases to Texas. The mosquito that gave me this parasite, it shouldn't have been in Big Bend. But changing temperatures, changing ecosystems, they're pushing tropical diseases north. What happened to me is going to happen to others. So please be vigilant. Check weird bumps. Don't ignore symptoms. And for God's sake, use bug spray." A ripple of laughter went through the room, easing the tension. Carter smiled his crooked smile. "I never thought a mosquito bite would teach me about humility and climate science, but here we are." After the service, people lined up to hug Carter, to share their own stories of delayed diagnoses or stubborn pride. Mrs. Chen held his hand for a long time, tears in her eyes. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. "Not of the old you who wouldn't ask for help, but of this you who's brave enough to admit you need it." That evening, Carter and Jessica sat on her back porch watching the sun set over Austin. Carter's body was tired from the social interaction, his brain foggy from the effort of concentration. But his heart felt fuller than it had in years. "You did good today, Dad," Jessica said. I meant every word. Jesse, I know I've got a long road ahead. The dialysis, the arthritis, the cognitive stuff, it's not going away. But I'm not facing it alone anymore. That makes all the difference. We're facing it together, Jessica corrected. That's the deal, remember? No more solo suffering, Carter nodded. I've been thinking about something. When your mom died, I thought my life was over. Thought the best years were behind me, but maybe this is a different kind of best. Not easier, not what I planned, but meaningful in a way I couldn't have imagined. What do you mean? I mean, maybe surviving isn't just about staying alive. Maybe it's about learning to live differently, to find purpose in the brokenness, to help others avoid the mistakes I made. Carter looked at his daughter. Your mom used to say that our scars tell our story. I've got plenty of scars now, inside and out. Maybe it's time to let them tell a story that helps someone else. Jessica leaned her head on her father's shoulder, careful of his dialysis catheter. She'd be proud of you, Mom. She'd be so proud of both of us. I hope so. I hope she sees that we figured it out. That we found our way back to each other. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Inside the house, Carter's medications were lined up on the counter. Pills for his heart, his kidneys, his arthritis, his blood pressure. Tomorrow would bring another round of challenges, doctor's appointments, physical therapy, the ongoing adjustment to a new normal. But tonight, sitting with his daughter under the Texas stars, Carter Mitchell felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Peace. Not the peace of having no problems, but the peace of knowing he didn't have to face those problems alone. The peace of forgiveness given and received. The peace of a second chance, hard-won and precious. Jesse, he said softly, thank you for everything. For finding me, for fighting for me, for giving me a place in your life even though I'm broken. Dad, you're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. Maybe. But either way, thank you. Jessica squeezed his hand. You don't have to thank me. You're my father. This is what love looks like. Showing up, staying, helping each other heal. That's what family does. Your mom taught you that. You both did. It just took me a while to remember. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Carter thought about the specimen jar that Dr. Bennett had kept, the preserved botfly larva that had nearly killed him. It was small, insignificant looking, now that it was dead, but it had changed everything. Sometimes the smallest things have the biggest impact. A mosquito bite, a phone call not made, a word of anger spoken in grief. These tiny moments accumulate, build into something larger than themselves, become the turning points of our lives. But also, a stranger taking a photo, a colleague reaching out, a daughter refusing to give up. These small acts of connection and compassion could accumulate too, could build into salvation. I'm going to do that CDC interview, Carter said suddenly. Not just about the medical stuff, but about everything. The pride, the silence, the cost of not asking for help. If even one person hears it and picks up the phone to call their kid, or makes that doctor's appointment, or admits they need help, it'll be worth it. You're going to help a lot of people, Dad. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just an old fool who finally learned what matters. Carter smiled. Either way, I'm here. I'm alive. And I've got you. That's more than enough. They stayed on the porch until the mosquitoes drove them inside, both of them now religious about bug spray, one of many small changes that had emerged from the nightmare. As they got ready for bed, following the routine they'd established over the past weeks, Carter realized something profound. He'd spent most of his life trying to be strong, trying to be the man his grandfather had taught him to be. Stoic, independent, never complaining. But that strength had been a kind of weakness, a prison of his own making. Real strength, he understood now, was in the asking, in the admitting, in the reaching out when you needed someone to hold you up. His body was weaker than it had ever been. His mind was damaged. His future was uncertain. But his heart was stronger than it had been in years, fortified by love and humility and the hard-won knowledge that he was not, and never had been, alone. As Carter drifted off to sleep in Jessica's guest room, in a house that now felt like home, he whispered a prayer to his late wife. "We did it, Linda. We raised a good one. She saved me, just like you knew she would." And in the quiet of the Texas night, surrounded by love and second chances and the promise of tomorrow, Carter Mitchell, survivor of pride, of parasites, of his own worst instincts, finally, truly rested. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And whatever came next, they would face it together. That was enough. That was everything. Carter's story isn't just about surviving a parasite, it's about the silent epidemic of pride that nearly cost him everything. How many of us carry burdens alone because we were taught that asking for help means weakness? How many symptoms do we ignore, telling ourselves it's nothing when our bodies are screaming for attention? Carter spent 18 months estranged from his daughter, suffered through arthritis in silence, and let a simple mosquito bite become a death sentence, all because he couldn't pick up the phone. But here's the beautiful truth. It's never too late to reach out. It's never too late to say, "I need help," or "I'm sorry," or "I love you." Carter got his second chance when Jessica refused to give up on him. They rebuilt their relationship not despite the brokenness, but through it. Every dialysis treatment, every difficult conversation, every small act of care became a thread weaving them back together. That's the real miracle. Not just survival, but the courage to be vulnerable, to let people see your scars, to ask for the help you need. Because the strongest thing you can ever say isn't, "I'm fine." It's, "I'm not fine, and I need you." Have you ever let pride stop you from asking for help when you needed it most? What finally gave you the courage to reach out? Or what's still holding you back? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.